So good morning. I'm Wendy Goldberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Tri-Faith Initiative, and I'm so grateful that you are taking this hour to be with us today to honor the service of the spiritual wellness needs in our community and to gather to realize that you all have been carrying a community and that we want to express appreciation for you, for your service, for your skills and for your heart. And also to realize that we are so codependent. We need each other, and these kinds of opportunities where we can come and share and be vulnerable are opportunities for us to grow together and to learn where there might be additional opportunities as we move forward. So that's some of what we're hoping comes today, that this is nourishing for you. I hope it's educational as well. And I invite you to help us to use this moment to gain strength to come together and see where we might go next as a collective. So thank you for being here. It's very important. For those who are not familiar with the Tri-Faith Initiative, we are in Omaha, Nebraska. We have intentionally co-located a church, a mosque, and an interfaith center, a synagogue, a church, a mosque, and an interfaith center, say that correctly. And we started out of the roots of 9/11, and some of the Jewish and Muslim community came together, built a relationship. And then as we were seeking a new place for our houses of worship, decided that we should do this bold experiment. It does not exist anyplace else in the world. And so this co-location is an experiment. And what we have learned, particularly in the middle of COVID, is that we are interdependent and that we have a model of collaboration that is unique. And so the lessons that we are learning to build trust, to have brave conversations, to lead with trust are applicable in other settings as well. And that if people are shifting in terms of the religious landscape or only coming to a house of worship an hour or two or whatnot a week, we know that's a very siloed time. In other spaces, in schools, in workplace, in healthcare, people are exposed to the religious other. And so that's so important to our mission and why we are partnering today with CHI Health and the Chaplain Innovation Lab and CPE to talk together today about how we can continue to know each other better, deepen our understandings of each other's stories, and find more opportunities to grow together for the future. So grateful that we are here to do this together. Thank you to CHI for helping to convene us. And I would hope maybe Michael, if you could, I know your video is off now, but if you could perhaps pipe in and tell us a little bit about the lab and why you're interested in us gathering here together. And thanks.
Well, thank you very much for having us. We're very glad to support and be part of this event. The Chaplaincy Innovation Lab was launched in 2018, really to bring chaplains, theological educators, clinical educators, and then social scientists. It was mostly social scientists that launched the lab into a conversation about the work of chaplaincy and spiritual care. And we come at it sort of from two different directions. On the one hand, we're looking out at the religious spiritual landscape of the United States and trying to say, okay, what does that look like? Who does not have access to spiritual care, and how can we make sure that they actually do get access to spiritual care? And what would it look like to make sure that chaplains are prepared to meet people wherever they are, whether that means making changes in CPE or classroom training or whatever. We do really have a very strong interest in and a lot of emphasis on making sure that what we call the pipeline of the profession is tightened up, is made a little bit more leak-proof than it currently is now. And this is where I think we overlap with what's being done today in trying to support chaplains, especially chaplains who come from historically marginalized communities, whether that is by racial identification or religious identification or whatever. We know that there are so many people out there who either would like to become chaplains or would like to continue being chaplains, but for whatever reason, they don't have the support. or there are a lot of systemic barriers between them and continuing on through the profession. And so we do lots of things like conversation circles, professional development, just trying to identify whatever resources are available and spreading the word about them so that people who feel called to chaplaincy or feel that chaplaincy is their career know that they have a place in it and that the classroom, CPE, and the workplace are all going to be inviting for them now and in the future. So we try to support chaplains however we can. We do try to be as responsive as possible. So we have plenty of ideas of our own of what we would like to do. But of course, we want to be responsive to what chaplains need. So I just encourage you to check us out. We're at chaplaincyinnovation.org. We're on social media. We have a Facebook group, all kinds of ways to interact with us. And we're always happy to hear from chaplains and see what we can do to be helpful. Thank you, Wendy, for having us.
Sure. One last question, and feel free to pipe in during the rest of the conversation, but ACPE, just a bit, what's the relationship between the lab and the association, and just a little bit more time. Thanks.
Yeah, so Trace Haythorne, who is the executive director of ACPE, was one of the co-founders of the lab. So it was Wendy Kedge, Trace, and myself that launched the lab back in 2018. And so ACPE, I mean, I don't know what everyone's sort of credentials and background are here, but ACPE is the only Department of Education approved, I forget what the actual terminology is, but approved organization that can accredit CPE centers across the United States. And so, you know, the lab is not sort of like a department of ACPE. We don't have a legal relationship, but we work very closely together on anything that has to do with chaplaincy education, because ACPE is very interested in addressing some of the very issues that I spoke about earlier. And, you know, if chaplains are going to get meaningful positions and advance in their careers, CPE is one of the credentials that they need to do that. And not just the, you know, the technical piece of paper credential, but that's the experience that chaplains need. There are so many folks who contact me or the lab in general or whatever, saying, I really want to get involved in chaplaincy, but I have no idea where to start. And it's really important that they have this kind of experience, this type of, well, Tahara and Shelly can speak to this more closely than I can, but this experience that sort of breaks a chaplain down and builds them back up in a way that prepares them to serve. So ACPE and CIL are very close allies in this work. We don't have a legal relationship. There's nothing that, you know, literally ties us together, but we're very close partners and do a lot of work together.
Thank you for that background. I think it's really helpful. Some of the people who are on the call today are in health ministry and don't have the credentialing of being a chaplain, but certainly those are people who are prime candidates for further education. So we appreciate the resources that you're providing across the country, and value you being here with us today. So, and for the perfect introduction to Shelly and Tahara, thank you for that transition. Thank you both for being here with us. And let's start by getting to know you a little bit. Tahara, how about if we ask you first? Could you tell us a little bit about you? I love when people introduce themselves. I think we do a better job, perhaps, of include some bit about your spiritual journey and your role as a chaplain, please.
Sure. Well, thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for this opportunity to have a rich conversation today about this very important work that we do. And I'm excited to be with Shelly, colleague, to just join together in some conversation. So I grew up in Southern California in a family where my father was a devout Muslim and my mother was Christian. She's Baptist. My father was also biracial. He was part Indian, part African American, and my mother was African American. So I grew up in a family where we celebrated Christmas and Ramadan and Easter and the Eids, and it was just, I didn't know anything different. And one of the things my father would always say to me, he said, if you don't like someone, Tahara, you probably have not taken the time to get to know them and know their story. And so my upbringing in Southern California, which was very diverse, like my friends were from different backgrounds, was religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, was I think a solid foundation for chaplaincy some years later. when I had an aunt who was sick and she was in the hospital, and they didn't think she was going to make it, and they told us to get her affairs in order. And I just remember this chaplain showing up, and I don't remember what he said. I don't remember his prayer, any of that, but I can remember what he looked like. He had on a brown suit, and he just hung out in my aunt's room with us and was comforting and kind. And I said, he doesn't know us, and he's here. And that stayed with me for a long time. So as my life, things happened, and I ended up with an opportunity to go back to school. I got a degree in psychology and did an internship as a chaplain with at a Christian school, actually, Pentecostal school. So I got to this lovely integration of Christianity into spiritual care. And when I interned as a chaplain, I interned with Fuller Seminary MDiv students. There were about 5 of them in this internship, and they encouraged me. And they said, if you really want to do this work, you got to get your master's and you got to do CPE. And I did that. And after graduating from seminary, I went to Claremont School of Theology in Southern California. I did two residencies, one at UCLA and then one here in the Baltimore area at Johns Hopkins. And then I was invited to stay at Hopkins and train to be a CPE educator. So that was very exciting. The scary part was there weren't any Muslim women who had gone before me who had done it. So I had to kind of figure it out on my own. But it was mainly my non-Muslim colleagues and friends who really helped me and loved me through the process. So after graduating, I was in Reading, Pennsylvania for about 4 years. I was the director of CPE there. And now I'm at MedStar Washington Hospital Center in Washington, DC, where I run the CPE, I'm the manager of the CPE program. So I'll stop there. Is that okay, Wendy?
Beautiful. Thank you
Okay.
so much for sharing. Shelly, the same question.
Good afternoon. What a pleasure it is to be here with all of you this afternoon, and with Tahara and Wendy and Michael. I'm grateful for this invitation and opportunity. I grew up in rural Eastern North Carolina as a Southern Baptist. There's multiple generations of my family who have been very steeped in Southern Baptist life. I decided to go to college. I sensed a call to ministry and thought I would work in a church congregational setting. Was in a space where I had a pastor who was supportive, which was somewhat unusual as a female in Southern Baptist life, but did have support from my congregation and my family. Attended a Baptist college in North Carolina, and then was told, oh, you really need to do master training, just like what Tahara mentioned. And so explored a couple of different options and ended up in New Jersey at a Presbyterian seminary there to complete my Master of Divinity. And while I was there, I did 1 unit of CPE at a level 2 trauma center in inner city Trenton, New Jersey. And that was a very intense experience. And I decided I never wanted to do CPE ever again, and I didn't want to be a chaplain. But here I am today, and I'm a chaplain. I've been board certified for 10 years, so there's some gaps in the story, right? I did end up in congregational ministry for some time as a pastor to a small congregation in Oregon. And while I was there, really recognized that there were these parts of my story that I had these hopes for hearing about people's spiritual narratives. I wasn't as much interested in conversations about what people believe, but I was much more interested in how people arrived where they are spiritually and where they still had hopes to go and what they were wrestling with. And I found that even in a very progressive congregation there weren't many people who were having those conversations. And so it occurred to me that I might need to move outside of congregational life to have those conversations that really I felt deeply moved by, deeply engaged by, deeply wanted to have those conversations with folks. And actually thinking some in preparation for today with some of the helpful reflection questions that Wendy provided, I thought about these various touch points, right? And time. I was able to attend a meeting of the National Council of Churches at one point when I was in high school, and that was really formative to be introduced to a variety of denominations. We went on several outings to interfaith settings. So I actually went to a service worship space in a Hindu temple, and that was very formative for me. So there were a lot of these sort of little touch points along the way that really made a difference when I was sort of recognizing that I wanted to have conversations about spiritual journeys. And that was a point at which I began to feel disconnected from my congregation and actually began exploring CPE options, connected with a CPE supervisor in the area and what felt either providential or serendipitous, depending on your perspective, maybe a little bit of both. And he said, someone just dropped out of the CPE residency. I have a slot and you would be a good candidate for that slot if you'll apply. You would be starting in a couple of months, but I need your application by Friday. It's like less than a week away. So this person who said I would never be a chaplain and never do any more CPE, did a year-long CPE residency at Veterans Affairs in Portland, Oregon, really loved it, and actually ended up applying for a second-year residency at a level 1 trauma hospital and served in pediatric ICU there. Ended up being called back to the VA, where I spent about a decade in my role there as a staff chaplain. And about 3 years ago, moved to Indianapolis and accepted a role with Indiana University Health in our downtown hospital system here. So that's a little bit about my spiritual journey, about chaplaincy. I'm not sure if I covered all the pieces, Wendy, but maybe that's a good start.
It is. So one of the reasons that we started this conversation, and to be honest, we dreamt of this conversation before COVID. As we've been through so much, and I've had so many conversations with the CHI team about what caregivers need in this moment is somewhat to name what you're holding and what you're carrying. And so just in a couple of words, Shelly, how are you and what do you need? And could you perhaps model that? And those who want to share, start thinking about, so I'm going to ask Shelly and Tahara that first, but I also would love to hear from others who are here today. How are you and what do you need? And I'm honestly asking that, not maybe the version that you hear from your partner or from your supervisor who wants to know whether you're going to be there for them, but really as a human today in your heart, how are you and what do you need? Shelly?
I'll say, Wendy, that even the authenticity with which you ask that feels tender, really, because there's so much that's been so heavy. And up until, I don't know, just a couple of months ago, I would say if I was a cell phone battery, I would have been completely red. And you're getting that blinking of like running out of battery, about to shut down. I just was really very spent and very at sort of the end of what I could offer for caring for other people. I did have the opportunity to take some time away and really did a lot of fairly intentional reflection, not only about what I've experienced and what I found meaningful, what's been challenging, who's been in that with me and can be meaningful conversation partners, but what I need professionally and personally, and what's sustainable and unsustainable about my current practices. Are there some changes I need to make in addition to some changes that I hope those around me will make, systems around me will make. So that was some of what I was thinking about.
Thank you so much. Whew, we all need more than just a deep breath. Yeah. Tahara, how about you?
I really appreciate your question, Wendy. And it makes me not want to give just a stock answer that may come out. I'm doing well, and I'm also overwhelmed in some ways. Someone asked me recently, when was the last time I had a vacation? I don't think I've had a vacation. I don't even know what a vacation is, to be honest. Because when I take time off, I'm in a program. When I take time off, it's usually to study or to do something else, it's not rest. So I feel proud of myself because yesterday I met with my boss to take off some time, some education time, just to be away from the hospital, take care of myself, and then to create space for my studies instead of cramming my studies into what already exists. So that makes me feel good. I'm also a survivor of breast cancer, and my mammogram's in a couple weeks. So every year I have this sense of fear, anxiety around my mammogram. So that's coming up, and that's one thing I'm aware of. It's just kind of hanging out until that day when I get the actual mammogram and they tell you right there if I need to do something else or if I'm okay for the next year. So I appreciate you asking very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Such a reminder that I try to think about every day is in my conversations with people who maybe don't respond how I wish they would, to consider what they're carrying. I know you all know that, but it's harder to do than it is to talk about. And so I just want to name that. I'd like to invite anyone else who's here today who's maybe not had a space to put down something that you're carrying, or even just to put a name to it, to unmute yourself and know that this is a space that we'd like to be walking with you today. Anyone want to share something that they're carrying or how you are? You do it for so many others.
Well, I will just share. I mean, I think many of us are feeling the same types of things that Shelly and Tahara are experiencing, just kind of the one day at a time and get through one day. I have a lot of loved ones in my life, so I, really don't have a lot to complain about. But what I kind of would love to see or need to see is a kinder world. And so I've always been a connoisseur of the news and just watching it several times a day. I kind of would always pride myself on knowing what was going on and current events. And I've kind of had to turn all of that off in the last several months, just because it's so heavy. So I really don't know what's going on in the world, kind of by choice and maybe by need. So I've had to, what I feel like, insulate myself just a little bit and surround myself with people, who bring peace and joy and kindness and some of those things. But I feel like I'm also missing out on quite a bit because I've had to turn some of that off.
Thank you, Nikki. I found that I've needed to do that. I've read some really good fiction along the way in that space. So yeah, anyone else? Okay. We'll come back. Thank you. Back to Tahara. Talk to us about what you need from your employer or your family or your spiritual community. You've spoken a little bit about what you need to do for self, but in this industry, what are some of the needs of this moment? How do we need the systems to show up?
Thank you, Wendy, for the question. One of the things that I'm excited about here at Washington Hospital Center is that there's been a sincere effort around equity, inclusion, and diversity. In 2001, our hospital was named the most racially inclusive hospital in Washington, D.C., and we're number 15 in the country by the Lown Institute study. And I'm also excited that we are also, we've earned the distinction of LGBTQ plus healthcare equity leaders in the Human Rights Campaign Foundation Healthcare Equity Index. We have a leader score of 100. And that's connected to my story. I was sharing with you all that I grew up in an environment that was so diverse, and that, not saying it was perfect, but my upbringing was that everybody comes together and we support each other regardless of our background. So I'm excited that I work for a healthcare institution that is looking at the diversity and what everyone brings to the table. What I've needed from the institution, and I've gotten it actually, is what I described in my conversation with my educator. I feel comfortable being able to say what I need to do my job well, how I'm doing, and the space to be creative in the CPE program. I also appreciate that I've been given somewhat some freedom to build a CPE program here where I can bring all those same values into the program. We have some really hard conversations in our CPE circles around, the needs of people who are often otherized. We talk about race dynamics and people who are differently abled and so forth, to get the conversation on the table. The other thing that I would say I need from family members, my family members are my soft place to fall, especially my 4-year-old my grandson, CL. There's something about his innocence. Well, I'm sorry, he's 3, he'll be 4 in September. Just his innocence, just his curiosity about life, his questions. He's such a reminder for me that if I ever feel like I've made it, or if I ever feel like I've gotten to a point where I don't have any more questions, or I'm not questioning things, then I'm not doing well. So he's a constant reminder that I can ask hard questions. I don't have to know everything. That's what I get from him. And my immediate family, my husband, my daughter who lives with us, I get lots of love and unconditional love and acceptance there. So those are things I can think about right off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Did
I want
answer
to
your
ask,
question?
you did. I'm going to ask you one question, and I did not tell you I was going to ask you this question. And so
Okay.
if it's not comfortable, say, let's not go there today, Wendy. But I'm curious about the energy with which you shared the openness that the institution that you work for has for the LGBTQIA community. And that's not necessarily normative within the Muslim community to be vocal about that or to take a stand in any way. And I'm curious about how you hold tension between what feels right or loving or affirming and the freedom of religion for individuals to express their religious traditions and the institution's kind of policies and procedures around such. How are you holding all of that?
Yes, thank you. So in the Muslim community, there are members of the LGBTQ plus community within the Muslim community. One of the things that I appreciate about chaplaincy and what I've learned is, how do I say, although spiritual traditions may have, or religions may have doctrine and ways of like the shoulds and should nots and things like that, what I always fall back on is in the Holy Scripture, in the Quran, every chapter except one starts with, in the name of the divine, the most gracious and the most merciful. And when I think about that as like foundational for my tradition, the abundance of like God's love and care and mercy for everyone, that is what I hold on to as a blanket of my ministry, is this idea of a loving presence that envelops everyone. And that helps me to remove the labels, Black, white, gay, straight, trans, cisgender. It just helps me to stay grounded in compassion and love and to be curious about people. It goes back to what my dad said. Tahara, if you're judging someone or you're not liking someone, you don't know their story. You don't know know their story. So there may be some Muslims who say, hey, you're wrong, or other people from other traditions who say you're wrong, but that's my foundation of life and ministry that was modeled by my parents who were from different religions. I never saw them argue about religion. I never heard them tell each other, you're right and I'm wrong. You know, we're human. We're all from the human race. So I think that's what I carry with me in my ministry. And it helps me just to be myself, and to know that there are people who might think that, you know, who I am is not right, you know, by the color of my skin, by the religious tradition that I have, that people may judge me and think that I'm not right in certain ways. So it keeps me humble. Oh, I'm so sorry. And I'll just stop there because my phone is about to ring. So,
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability. I really appreciate it. I think it's important for us to hear. Shelly, the same first question to you is, what do you need from the systems, from your employer, from your family structure, from your spiritual community?
Thank you for the question. I would say for my employer, I've needed a variety of things really. I mean, one of the things is space for connection, like time to have lunch with colleagues, time to have these like water cooler kind of conversations where I can connect with my colleagues, but also space to have some really brave and hard conversations about all of the things that are happening outside of work, in our society, in our world and culture, around racial violence, around women's reproductive health, around mass violence incidents, and have some hard conversations, some brave conversations. You know, our team has a lunchtime huddle several days a week, and invites one another to bring different perspectives to those conversations and really tries to be respectful. I mean, we say we can't promise that these are safe spaces, but they can be brave spaces. And some of what's helped us is actually the ACPE has a video series, the 846 series, that are a series of videos that look at issues of racism and gender concerns and violence from the perspectives of different educators in a conversational kind of format. And those have opened up some important conversations for my team. And it's just been helpful to be able to have those conversations in a civil setting, in a brave setting with people from different backgrounds and different experiences, because there are so many spaces where it doesn't feel like those conversations can happen. So that's been actually really meaningful, is to bring some of the hard things to work and have a space, contained space to be able to talk about them. Other things that have been helpful, actually our employee assistance program here has been really helpful. I've utilized all 8 of my sessions for this year. So that's been a useful resource. Those are some of the things through my workplace. And I'd say genuine appreciation, right? Like having leaders who take a few moments to really understand what some of the challenges have been for chaplains in healthcare right now, and then take time to express genuine thanks, gratitude for some of the pieces that chaplains have sort of stepped up and learned about and been creative about, because we know that chaplains have really been innovating a lot during COVID and with other challenges going on, and stepping into spaces we may not normally be in, especially with staff care. For friends, family, spiritual community, I think it's really been some patience and flexibility for me. There are, usually I'm a person that if I make a commitment, I'm following through on the commitment and I'm right there. And, I've needed more space. So I've needed the space to say, I know I made plans with you, but I'm just not feeling up to it today and I need to reschedule, and I need that to be okay. Still communicating well with them, but there being this compassion that when I need space or when I need flexibility, that I can say what I need, and that'll be honored. And that there are other times when I really need connection and might reach out at the last moment and say, hey, can we do this together? Are you free? Or could we have a 10-minute phone conversation? I really need to chat. So I think some of that flexibility in my relationships and my spiritual community of friends, family, that's been really helpful for me.
Beautiful, thank you. Shelly, you started to mention some resources that you have relied upon. I'll give you a minute to think if there's any others that you wanted to add, but Tahara, are there any particular resources for this, for getting through that you have relied on or could offer to this community today?
Yeah, we have, of course, through our health benefit, for anyone who wants to use their mental health benefit, we have that. That's a blessing to have that, to get counseling or mental health services. We also have that, I want to call it EAP. I personally haven't used it, but we have that. Our institution, during the height of COVID, we were really, really surprised, but MedStar, in appreciation for us, they gave us a monetary gift just as a show of appreciation. That was very helpful. That it was just a show of gratitude for the service. And one thing that, if I can say this, where we've tried to be helpful and support the leadership, right when COVID started, we created a vessel of hope that we put in our chapel. And it was a place for whoever was in the hospital, they could put their fears, their prayers, and then we would use those to help us write our chaplain reflection for the month. And I often use that vessel. I would put my own thoughts, fears, concerns in that vessel. And I appreciated that leadership supported our spiritual care department over the years when we've been talking about our chapel not being inclusive. And we finally got the funding and everything, and we just had the ribbon cutting for a new interfaith chapel that is more welcoming for everyone. So there's been a lot of different ways I felt the support of MedStar Health here.
Some of those
Unmute myself. Go ahead.
Some of those resources for me, and one of them came through the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab and one of their newsletters. I learned about it. So the Shea Moral Injury Center through the Volunteers of America offered REST conversations, REST, where different healthcare workers could come together for peer facilitated conversations. I only attended one of those, but I found it really helpful to talk with people from other settings and other healthcare systems outside of my team. I also utilize spiritual direction. I meet with a spiritual director once a month, and that's been a really helpful resource. That's something that I started when I was in seminary, but there are other ways to become connected. There's an International Association of Spiritual Directors. They have a website that could be utilized that I'll put in the chat soon. And the other thing I'll say is my faith group stepped up a lot. There's my faith group utilizes endorsement through the Association of Professional Chaplains. So they actually have an office that's set up to help support chaplains, pastoral counselors, and other spiritual caregivers. And that leader really recognized the stress on chaplains and spiritual caregivers. And we had every other month sort of peer support, reflection, prayer sessions in the evenings that were structured. And she provided a lot of that program and support. So that connection through my faith group as part of my chaplaincy credentialing was really supportive.
Beautiful. Please use the chat if there are additional resources. I'm going to put in the chat in a moment. There are some awakening circles, which are global opportunity for people to come together, and they're doing a compassion challenge starting on September 11th, where different faith community leaders will offer some kind of reading, and it's an opportunity online for people to come into relationship with each other. And I will share that in the chat as this time continues, but please know that we'd love you to join us in those circles. We started to touch on this also, but Shelly, perhaps you can answer this question with a little bit more intention, creating these communities of concern for caregivers. You know, you can see we have a small and mighty group that's joined today. How might people do more in their communities to bring people together for this support?
I'm trying to think of ways. I mean, I think working through faith groups, working through other nonprofits in the community. I don't know if there might be ways to work through like public library settings even. I'm just thinking of community gathering spaces. What are the community gathering spaces where you are? And how might those spaces be utilized to bring people together? Tahara, maybe you have other ideas while I'm thinking about some more specifics.
I think one thing that we got really dependent on though during COVID was, you know, Zoom and gathering virtually. Now we're transitioning into being together in spaces again. And I think it's an opportunity to be really creative. My daughter and I, and this isn't a spiritual community, but it felt like a spiritual experience. My daughter and I, in our neighborhood, we looked online and we were trying to find something to do. And it was, you know, you could go and pick fresh peaches and blueberries. And we were with a bunch of people out one Sunday morning, you know, talking and picking fruit together. And it was just, it just felt so good to be out. And I didn't have on a mask. And it felt, I mean, we were from, I guess, different backgrounds, but it felt like a community. So I'm wondering if we can start being really creative about community spaces, because spirituality doesn't mean religion. So where can we find connection? I find so much connection in other religions' houses of worship. I've been blessed to go to different parts of the world and be in like spiritual spaces with people from different backgrounds. So I'm wondering if that's an opportunity for us to create new spaces. And the statistics show that the younger generations, they're not as religious and maybe aren't finding community within the walls of our houses of worship. So how can we be creative for our children as well, to find spaces where they feel accepted and loved and they can be themselves? So that's kind of what I was thinking from what you were saying, Shelly.
Thank you. I was just reading a book called Eat, Pray, Code. And the premise of the book is that the religious landscape is shifting, particularly in Silicon Valley, and that the intention is that people will find meaning in their work. And that's a reason that people have moved away from religious communities, and that religious communities historically have taken care of kind of an immigrant population. But now, if people are going to find meaning in their work and bring your whole self and belong in the work environment, you will not only be more productive at work, but that will be your spiritual center. And I'm not proposing that that's the answer. I think it's a fascinating sociological study, and the reality that in workspaces for you, that is healthcare space, we are being asked to do so much, right? And sometimes that separation that we had between our spiritual home and our workplace was there for a purpose or a reason, and our culture is shifting and changing with this new generation. And so it's just, I'm fascinated. I could talk about this all day, but just a side point. I love that people are sharing some podcast books and such in the chat. Please continue to do that. I was wondering if either one of you might be willing to share. Now we realize we have a lot to lament about in terms of the uncovering related to systemic racism and a pandemic, but there have been silver linings. There have been really beautiful moments that have happened in the last 2 years where we've witnessed humanity come together, or we've really met the need of someone spiritually or otherwise. And I wondered if we could celebrate a few of those gifts. Maybe starting with you, Shelly, would you be willing to tell us what is something beautiful that you've witnessed as a chaplain in the last couple of years? I'd invite the rest of you. I'm going to ask you that question also, so I'll give you a little time to think about. We'd love to hear something that's been beautiful that you've witnessed in the last 2.5 years. Shelly?
I witnessed one of our chaplains provide spiritual care in a hospital parking garage when the family was not allowed in due to, visitor restrictions in the hospital. And still finding a meaningful connection there and some creativity with, an iPad that was on loan. And that was just a beautiful moment of going to where the person is.
Thank you. Tahara?
I would say during the pandemic, when I would be interviewing students for the program, I would ask the question, we're still running the program during COVID. You will be possibly encountering COVID patients, and how the potential students would emphatically say, oh, it's okay, I want to serve. It's okay, I want to help. And that was just so beautiful to me, that they were putting themselves in this. Some of them could have delayed doing CPE, but they came wanting to be with people because they knew that a lot of patients were isolated and they wanted to be there to serve. I thought that was very beautiful.
Thank you. Tom Backer and group, are you ready to share there something beautiful you witnessed, or that was just a audio blip? Anybody in that room want to share? Oh, yes. Anybody ready to tell us some beautiful moment that you've witnessed?
I'll share.
Please.
About a month ago, I'm in the CHI health system in the Omaha, Nebraska area, and I'm in a one chaplain hospital. So I'm a part of the system, but I'm in my own little silo. And I was walking through the main lobby, and the volunteer desk, or the main desk, they stopped me and said, that lady over there, she needs to talk to a chaplain. When you get that, you never know what you're gonna find. But it was a homeless lady who had been to the emergency department the night before. They treated her and released her, but she really had nowhere to go. And so I visited with her, kind of assessed her situation. She was hungry, didn't have anywhere to go. And I looked at the resources I had and I exhausted them basically. So I went to the social worker in the emergency department, and she wasn't with a patient at the time. So she came with me and kind of ran down her list with the woman. And she made 2 phone calls. And one of them was homeless shelter in the area. They had room for her. And then she was also able to get a voucher for a taxi cab for her. And the agency that the Metro Housing Authority that she would work with to get a place to live, they were at that homeless shelter that afternoon, and she set up an appointment for her. And so within about 15 minutes, this social worker, she worked a miracle. I told her, you're the miracle worker. So this woman who was homeless, hungry, had no place to go, wasn't sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, but you could tell she was very needy and still in some pain. But the taxi cab came and they took her to the shelter. So I thought it was neat. It was like teamwork. I did everything I could do, but I did not have all the resources the social worker had. So it was like, I just said, you're the miracle worker. It's a God thing. Thank you for helping me help this woman.
Thank you. Wow. I'm sure all of you have stories like that. Anyone else willing to share?
I will share. I was visiting COVID patients here, that time when families were not allowed to come, and calling the family and praying with them or comforting them and reassuring them the great care that they are receiving from our doctors and from our nurses, and that chaplains are able to go hold their hands and pray with them and listen them, and sometimes sharing some of the stories that were those were comforting for the families. But the most beautiful thing that I will share is that here's one side, a young patient in ICU with her young daughters, that I got to meet her when she was on different floor, and she could not have family there. And I was visiting with her and listening her and praying for her. And then she got sick and she ended up in critical care. And she was dying, and her daughters were allowed to come and be with their mother. So one side here is a patient and her young daughters, and I am ministering the family and telling them how loving and kind their mother was and how important her children were, and the stories of grandchildren, very comforting for the family. And the other side in Pakistan, my own brother was dying. So here on one side, I'm providing care for patients here in the hospital with COVID patients, and not knowing that the other side, my own brother, I knew that he's in the hospital, but I didn't know that he was dying with COVID. So, and he would pull up scripture on his phone and give it to the nurse and tell the nurse to read to him. And that was his comfort, that one side it's his own sister as a chaplain providing spiritual support. The other side it's the nurses, because there is no concept of having chaplains there. But the nurses became chaplains and reading the scripture that they are not familiar with and assuring him, that praying for him. So God's beautiful work is both hands, one side, this side using me, allowing me to be there, the other side using the staff to wrap my brother in his love. So even though it was sad and difficult, but at the same time, I experienced God's limitless love, that how he wraps us and how he reminds us that his love is there.
Thank you. I'm sure we will all carry that story with us. Thank you. Anyone else?
So I'll just share a really brief story of one of our faith community nurses in our group shared with me. And she kind of co-facilitates a grief share support group in her congregation. And of course, during COVID, they switched those grief share sessions to a virtual Zoom session. So one of the blessings of that is that it allowed family members who maybe lived across the country, they could participate in that together. But in this particular story, at the close of their session, like their 8 or 12-week session, whatever it was, they took little gift bags or care bags to the homes of the people who lived locally in our area, and just checked in on them and asked if they could pray with them. And this one particular lady that they went to, she found out that she had been caring for both of her parents during the course of COVID, and both of them had passed away during, this time. But in the course of their conversation, she found out that this lady hadn't left her house for over a year and was living by herself, and, had never physically touched another human being in that period of time. So it was just a really moving, episode for both of them. And it's just truly a blessing. Regina asked if she could give her a hug and pray with her and hold her hand, and she did. And it was just extremely healing for that individual.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm not surprised to know that I feel nourished from this hour. I'm so grateful that you have all been able to join us. And Shelly, any last thoughts from you, and then Tahara?
It's just been an honor to be in this space. I appreciate Wendy and Tri-Faith, and also the lab for hosting this conversation today.
Thank you, Tahara.
Yes, I'd like to echo what Shelly just said. Thank you, Wendy, for this opportunity, and for Tri-Faith and Michael Skaggs from the lab. It's been very rich, and I feel like this was a community for me today. So thank you for allowing me to share my truth and to be with you all and to hear from you. I see you, Colleen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to CHI for helping to make this possible, to Tahara and Shelly for being you. There's not more better way to say that, to the lab for supporting us in this work. And may we all go from strength to strength. Take care.